Hello, this is James Arena-DeRosa. I do represent part of the town of Millis. I represent Middlesex 8 in the legislature, which also includes Holliston, Hopkinton, and Sherburne. Delighted to be here in Millis today. We're going to take some questions from constituents, things that you're concerned about. Well, I know there's a lot of concern about taxes, especially as affordability becomes a big concern here in Massachusetts. We did pass a historic tax relief package last year in Massachusetts. It actually gave considerable tax relief. We doubled the senior circuit tax break, which makes a lot of seniors eligible for that new tax break. That should help. I actually have some paperwork down at the senior center for people who might have interest in how that works. We also doubled the estate tax exemption, which I think is going to help a lot of people. I know $1 million used to sound like a lot of money. It's not. I mean, sometimes just a house and some modest income to leave behind, and people are getting hit pretty hard with those taxes, so that's a change. We've increased support for childcare and dependents as well. So there are some things that we have done. I know it's a struggle, and of course, when we talk about taxes, there's also a lot of concern. The small towns are especially hit hard by their local property taxes, which is often when people talk to me about taxes, that's what they're concerned about. And there are a couple things that we'll talk about later in the program that I'm interested in doing. So yes, we've done some things. I know there's some talk out there, the governor thinking about other taxes to add. We just did a big tax relief package last session, so I would rather we get some experience around that before we do something new, but we'll see what happens. So the topic of the state formula, the formula that's used for funding for education, has come up a lot. I am particularly concerned about the way it hurts small towns. And it's interesting, I even got calls about this before I even took my oath of office in 2023, after I first elected in 22. So a couple things. One is, I don't think the formula is fair. I'm hoping there's a little bit of discussion that we're going to revisit it. And without getting into all the details of it, and I'm still sort of digging into it to learn it a little better. But at the moment, and I understand, I get it. Some of the gateway cities, really poor cities, Lowell, Lawrence, they need a little extra help from the state. I don't mind that. What I mind is that everyone else is kind of lumped together. So towns that I represent, especially a town like Millis, which is kind of in the middle, great town, but we're not Weston, we're not Wellesley, we're not wealthy. We're doing well. And I don't know why, when they did the formula, they didn't do a graduated system so that, okay, if you were really poor, you'd get a fair amount of help from the state. If you were really wealthy, you'll do your own thing. But if you're in the middle, we'll give you a little bit of help. I don't know why we don't give those towns a little bit of help. I think we should. I'm also a little concerned, when we passed the Fair Share Amendment at the ballot a couple of years ago, I think a lot of people thought it was going to go to K-12 education, or at least some of it, to give some tax relief to the towns. And it's not that I'm opposed to free community college, which is one of the things that we did. But meanwhile, I've got layoffs in Millis, right? I've got young people that are getting crushed by student debt. Why aren't we doing something about that? Why aren't we doing something to ease the burden? I do have a specific piece of legislation that I'm hoping would help. And this is interesting. I got calls from the town of Millis, from people on the select board and on the school committee, again, before I even took office, because they were so concerned about the rising costs of special education. Now, let me be clear. I want to make sure that every child gets the education they need. Let's just accept that as an important point. I do want to debate who pays for it, though. And I think right now small towns are just getting crushed by sped ed costs. For example, OSD, it's a division in the governor's office, raised the tuition rate by 14% for out-of-district placements, which I think is just unfair. I mean, after years of 1 or 2%, all of a sudden 14%, that got passed on to the towns. I have legislation that says the following. It says OSD has to limit the annual increase of tuition that they can pass on to communities to 2.5%. Why 2.5%? Because that's what we say to towns. Prop 2.5, which passed in 1980, I think, says that communities cannot increase their tax levy without going to the voters. They're limited to 2.5%. So why can the state with impunity say, well, we're just going to raise this rate by this much or this by that? I think that's wrong. Now, to be clear, again, in my legislation, OSD can still, if they so choose, if there's a rationale for making that the tuition itself higher, they can do that. But the balance after 2.5% has to come from the fair share amendment, from other state funds. It's not going to come from the communities. I just think that's a fair way to address it. The other thing that I want to look at, and I need to learn more about this as well, why isn't there more collaboration around sped ed? Why aren't there consortiums? In California, which is a pretty good school system, they only send 1% of their sped ed kids out of district. Massachusetts is as high as 5%. I think part of it is because we have a lot of small towns. You know, these lines were drawn 300 years ago when it took all day to get across the river. We should be smarter in the way we share resources. Maybe it's centers of excellence. And again, this is where the small towns get hurt. If you're a big city and you have enough of a division, you can trade off from year to year, depending what the needs are. And you have a group of sped ed teachers, and depending on this year's needs, we deploy them in one place or another. Why can't the small towns band together and do more of that? I actually have, I'm going to try to get an earmark for some funding to do some experimenting around here, but I need to spend a little more time over the next couple months with our school committees to get a better sense. Is this something that they'd like to see? I think it's a good idea that we should at least experiment with, but we'll see. Housing is one of the biggest challenges that we now face in Massachusetts, and it's affecting so many parts of the population. Young people, first-time buyers trying to get into the market, seniors that might want to downsize and sell their home and get something a little smaller. We're just getting squeezed at every turn. I live next door in Holliston. I'm not sure I could afford my house today. And I'm part of I support a group. It's called Diverse Home. We want to be a welcoming community. And what I say all the time is we absolutely want to be welcoming and include everybody. But it's kind of hard to be welcoming when the price tag is $800,000 to get in the door. You just eliminated 99% of Massachusetts. So there are a lot of things we could do. Now, it's interesting that the governor is thinking about a 10-year timeline because this has been an issue that we have neglected in Massachusetts for a generation, and it's finally caught up to us. Now, last year we passed a $5 billion bond bill. It's going to help a lot. There's $2 billion is going to go to rehab and construction of new housing. We're going to put more of our elderly units online because some of them have laid vacant because we haven't had the money to fix them, which is not good. There'll be some, at least $1 billion in investment in some of the low and moderate income housing as well. We did pass this is before I was elected, the legislature passed the MBTA Communities Act, which may help a little bit. I thought it was somewhat flawed in the way it was designed. And I know there's been a lot of controversy in different parts of the state. My town's finally ultimately all at least passed a plan to do it. But I'm not sure it's really addressing affordability if you look at the details. And my gripe with it from the beginning, one was, if we have to be part of the MBTA system, why aren't we getting the ride, by the way? But the other is nothing in that bill said anything about preference for first-time home buyers, for veterans, for town employees, for first responders, for elderly, for moderate and low-income folks. And to me, the opportunity was lost. Then why didn't we say, yes, it's really important that we build this housing, and a certain percentage of it is going to be to serve these populations. You know, I was talking with one of the police chiefs in my town. He said, James, I have 28 officers. 2 of them live in town. Most of them commute more than an hour away, especially the young men and women that join the force. They can't afford to be around here. And that is changing the nature of local policing. Growing up in Walpole, everybody knew everybody. Even when I was coaching Little League Baseball, we had a firefighter on our coaching team. We had one of the kids, his dad was in the police force, a couple teachers. Those days are gone, and it's kind of sad. And we're going to, everyone's going to be traveling an hour plus to get into town. And I just thought we should have done more to think about, what do we want our communities to be? And when housing comes up, people worry about, they don't want more building, the character of our community. And I always say to that is, but the character of our community is also the people who live here. And if we don't have a community that everyone can afford it, it's gonna hurt us in the long term. So, but it's gonna take us a while to get out of this. It's gonna take time. And I know there's all these 40Bs coming, but it's kind of weird the way the rules are written, because the the percentage of housing in 40B that counts, they count everything that's built, even though only a very small percentage of the actual complex is affordable. And that's tough too. And then back again, just for a second, to the MBTA communities. I mean, one of my towns, I mean, condos they think are going to go for $750,000. Well, that's not going to help with affordable housing. It might help overall with the stock of housing in Massachusetts. So this is going to be. I mean, we did a big housing bill, but I think we need to do it again and again over the next several years, and really need to work together on this issue. It's not going away, and it's tough for everyone, and it's going to change Massachusetts. It's one of the leading issues around affordability for the Commonwealth. I did want to mention that Candace Avery and the Housing Authority here in Millis were outstanding with their assistance. We had the Housing Secretary, it's called Livable Communities and Sustainable Communities now, Ed Augustus came out. There's been a problem with the CHAMP system, and again, we want public housing to be able to everybody, but people by their nature want to live in communities that they're familiar with, near their families, their place of work, their stores that they shop at, their networks. And we almost took away too much flexibility from the local housing authorities. We want people to be able to stay in this community if they can. And the CHAMP system just got so gummed up because people would say, well, I'll go anywhere, but then they didn't really want to go anywhere. And then we had hundreds of thousands of applications all across the state. I listened. I met with the Housing Authority here in Candace, but then we had the Housing Secretary out, and I'm really pleased. I think they're making some good progress. They're working down the list. The housing authorities are able to place a few more people locally if they can, which I think we want to do. It doesn't mean we shut other people out, but we want to do that. I had one absurd situation where I had someone from Hopkinton who got a placement in Lowell. And they're like, I'm not going to Lowell. And then meanwhile, here in Millis, somebody had been placed from Lowell, no car, no transportation, and Candace and the committee did everything they could to be supportive of this person. But like, we're not smart enough to figure out a system that can say, hey, there's a place in Lowell for the person in Lowell, and there's a place in Millis, which is only like 10 or 15-minute drive from Hopkinton. They would have much rather have lived in Millis. So I think we just have to get better. And sometimes we have ideas like public housing should be available to everybody. Of course it should be. But then we should take into account human nature and try to keep people as close to the communities as we can. So I really appreciate what they did. So Massachusetts has gotten a significant amount of funding from the federal government over the years. This is going to be a big challenge. We don't really know yet what the impact is going to be. It's interesting. I think some of what we're hearing from the president and the executive office is borderline illegal. I mean, money was appropriated by Congress. It was signed by the president. And some of it's already in court, and I think they're backing off on a few things. Remains to be seen. I think the next time I'm here for a session, we'll talk about the impact and what's going to go on. Regardless of that, however, the president does have a really important role in the budget. So the next budget is going to be really their opportunity, whether it's veto power or how they use it, and that is their prerogative in the executive branch to set that along with Congress. So we will see. I know there are also a number of questions about a number of programs related to health, to seniors, to fuel assistance, all of those programs where we are concerned. The federal government does contribute a fair amount of money to it. We have to see. It's interesting. I know this is more public policy, but it's a public policy, not a political issue. The Republican Congress passed a $4 trillion tax cut. They're talking about that this morning. And the way they're going to do it, they're just going to add $4 trillion to the deficit. I don't understand that. It seems irresponsible to me. The last time the federal government balanced the budget, Democrat Bill Clinton was president, and we had a Democratic Congress. The other side talks all the time about deficits. I'm worried about it too. It's not very responsible to spend money that you don't have. At the State House, the state government, say what you want, but every year we have to balance the budget. We can only spend as much money as we take in. I actually think that's a pretty good system. I don't know why the feds got away from that. I think it's going to hurt us long term for the country. So regardless of what happens this cycle immediately, I do think we're going to have to tighten our belts and think really carefully about what's going to happen, because I don't think there'll be as much resources from the federal government. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. So I did mention what I thought is an important approach to special ed. We'll see how that plays out over time. There are a couple other things that I'm involved with. I mean, I'm on the Agricultural Committee and have been involved with food issues, food security, and farming. So I want to support pollinators. That's really important for the future. Our importance of supporting local healthy food. There's some legislation around that. Sadly, and this sort of rose during COVID and hasn't really gone away, we still are experiencing significant food security, not just in Massachusetts, but in the communities I serve. Some of the local food banks and pantries that I support here are oversubscribed, which is kind of scary, and I think we need to make sure of that. And there are programs that we think will be continue to be funded that are almost fully federal funded, but we don't access those programs as well as we should. So we want to make sure that we're supporting the state entities that help people get on those programs. It's kind of counterintuitive the way it all plays out, but if people don't get on those programs, we're not getting dollars that are actually there. We're leaving money on the table, millions of dollars we're leaving on the table that goes into our local economy, which I think is important. One thing that I'm hoping to do, and it's interesting, a lot of talk about student debt. And I, of course, am very worried about what's been going on with young people and the escalating costs of education. It's interesting the way that we have dealt with it or are trying to deal with it. I mean, Biden had the $10,000 for every student, and I even talked a little with Elizabeth Warren about this. And I'm not opposed to some of what they've done or tried to do, but what I have kept asking is, why aren't we incentivizing service? Why aren't we recognizing young people who do Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Commonwealth Corps, and say to them, you're giving something back to the country. We want to help you. Yeah, we're going to try to help everybody with student debt relief, but we're going to give something to you. I have legislation that's going to give $5,000 in debt relief to Massachusetts residents who have served in Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, or Commonwealth Corps. I'm old enough to remember President Kennedy. I just, our generation, we were inspired to do something for the country. And I don't understand why in all this talk about debt relief, none of that has come up. And I think we should be acknowledging and recognizing service as best we can. Related to that, and this is kind of interesting too, because it also involves veterans, we don't do any preferences in Massachusetts for jobs for veterans, for Peace Corps volunteers, AmeriCorps. And again, I think that not guaranteeing them jobs, but those who have served this country in different ways, I think we could recognize them and at least give them an opportunity to interview for positions. The federal government has that rule. It worked really well for me when I was running USDA. We had wonderful people who came to work for us. Some of them are veterans. Some of them had done Peace Corps. I mean, it was a really good thing that we did, and I think the Commonwealth would benefit from doing that. And I also think it helps. The interesting too about debt relief, and you think long term about the future. I ran Peace Corps in the Northeast for years, and so many young people would come up to me and say, Mr. Arena-DeRosa, I've wanted to do Peace Corps my whole life. I can't even think about it. I've got $125,000, $150,000. The debts are just crazy. Like I need to work. I can't take that 2 years. I was talking with a person who helped create City Year, and he said it used to be a gap year for everyone. He says now it's becoming a rich kids club because most students, middle and working class kids, can't do that. They can't afford to do it. And what does that then do? Then when we're hiring people into the State Department or in government, someone's looking, and I did this too. You look at a resume and say, oh, this person did Peace Corps, they did this, good for them. Let's get them on board. So now instead of being a government for everyone or these opportunities for everyone, we're taking a small part of the population. Nothing against rich kids, they could participate too, but it should be something that we're encouraging all of American citizens to do. So I'm just hoping it can help a little bit as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to the session. We'll see. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic the way we're set up and that we have thousands of bills to consider. I do wonder if at some point we should self-limit the number of bills that can be filed, but that's not the way it's done in Massachusetts. It is done that way in some states. But I'm enjoying my time so far. We'll see how it goes. I would encourage anytime anybody needs help, if you're not sure if it's a state government issue or federal government or local, please feel free to call me. We'll put the email up on the screen so you have that. I also did want to make sure that everybody knows that on March 31st, I will have office hours down at the Senior Center. We'll also put that on the screen as well. And I welcome your participation. If you have questions or just want to come and listen, it would be great to see you. And thanks again for the opportunity to be here today in Wales.